So my clock just flipped over to 4 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome everyone to another Parsons, Bailey & Latimer webcast, this one titled, Getting Utah Back to Business. And first, I want to give a hearty thank you to Jason Castor, the Parsons, Bailey & Latimer Chief Business Development Officer, and his team who put these together. And Jason has reminded me that we are lawyers, and so as a result, we must read a legal disclaimer. So this disclaimer is extremely important. Things on these issues change rapidly. This webinar is not a substitute for legal advice. If there are questions about the information contained in the presentation and how it applies to your business, you should contact legal counsel. This presentation is not intended and will not serve as a substitute for legal counsel on these issues. Okay. So that's the disclaimer. Everyone's muted, but you have a chat feature, and I will be watching the chat feature and pick a few questions from it as we go. Your time is valuable. We're only going to take 45 minutes of it today, so let's jump right in. There's a lot of talk of when the state might go from orange to yellow. We all know that the state has gone from red to orange, and so we're here to help you prepare before that day. And to help you, we have assembled an all-star cast. We have a lawyer to tell you the law, but have also brought business leaders with a wealth of experience in the manufacturing area. First, I'd like to introduce Christina Jepson, a lawyer at Parsons, Bailey & Latimer. She's practiced employment law for 24 years. She was the chair of the firm employment department for over 10 years, and she recently became the firm's director of diversity and inclusion. Also, we have Alan Flake, the General Counsel and Vice President of the Easton Family Companies and all Easton Companies. And then we have Todd Bingham, the President and CEO of the Utah Manufacturers Association. So I'll thank all of you for being here. And so Christina, let me start with you. Lots to talk about. We want to make sure that employers, make sure that manufacturers get this right so that they don't avoid mistakes. My dad always taught me that whenever you're starting out in anything, you should make a plan. And so do you agree that you should make a plan? And if so, what does that plan look like for manufacturing who want to reopen?
Yeah, so actually the Utah governor's plan has suggested that all employers have a written plan for reopening or continuing their workplaces. And those should cover a number of things, but just some top ones I would say are policies on symptom checking, accommodating high-risk individuals, very important, strict hygiene, of course, social distancing, face coverings, which you need to obtain now if you don't have them, obviously, and what to do if you have a positive test or exposure in your workplace.
So thanks for that. So Alan, I'm going to start with you in talking about your business model. And I'll ask you, is Easton back to full capacity? And if not, kind of what are Easton's plans regarding that?
Full capacity yet. Fortunately, some of our facilities involve essential businesses. So those facilities continue to operate, but we have had other facilities that have had some layoffs and furloughs. Fortunately, we're reopening those facilities, and many of those employees have been brought back to work. We operate in several different states. That complicates things a little bit because there's different guidelines in those states for coming back to work. But we're working through that, and for the most part, those working from home, like myself, are continuing to work from home. So we're not quite back to full capacity that way. As far as our production capacity goes, I think the main impact on our business has been that retailers pretty much everywhere are shutting down or have shut down. And that of course means that product demand is down, sales are down. And that requires us to consider inventory levels, raw materials, all of those kinds of things that come with a downturn like that. And this has all happened on top of of seasonal layoffs, which are normal for us. So it's just meant that we've had to go a little deeper with some of that downsizing. But hopefully, as the market rebounds, we'll get back to I guess what we would call full capacity over the next few months. So, you know, as far as what we're doing to get there, I think, and to Christina's point about making a plan, when this all started back in very early March, we created a work from home policy, anticipating that we might get to this. And so we'll follow that policy, which anticipated that people would eventually start coming back to work as well. We're in no real hurry to do that. As you mentioned, the state of Utah has now moved from red to orange, but even in the moderate risk orange category, we're encouraged to work from home where possible. So we'll continue to do that. Of course, for manufacturing companies, not everyone can work from home. That's just the nature of what we do. So we're making sure that our employees know exactly what it is. And that plan is a big part of that, to know what we're doing to actively monitor and screen symptoms, and what we're doing to regularly and thoroughly clean our facilities, workstations, all of that. So hopefully by doing all of that, our employees will feel confident in a safe return. And that's what we're looking forward to in this next phase or next step.
And you guys don't operate a retail operation, right? It's mostly a manufacturing operation.
It is a manufacturing operation. Of course, we've got retailers that we sell to all over the world. So a global crisis like this definitely has an impact on what we're doing, but we don't have brick and mortar stores ourselves, no.
Because one of the interesting things that we've seen in all the webinars that we do is, you know, some of the people that we're talking to have both customers and also employees. And for us and for you, you're really just trying to keep your employees safe because you don't have customers coming to your plants.
Our customers are really our dealers, distributors, and those. So not the same situation that you're going to get with others. That's accurate.
So Todd Bingham, you have been at this for a while. You've been the head of the Utah Manufacturers Association for I think as long as I've known you. And so you have to watch over all manufacturing in the state of Utah. Can you give us a little idea of kind of what percentage of your members are back to, you know, work in full, and what they're doing to reopen?
Yeah, I think, thanks, J. Michael, the official name. You know, I think most of our folks are kind of in the same boat as Alan indicated there, that you know, most of them in a variety of subsectors of manufacturing were deemed critical and essential during that time period, and many of them were able to retool and repurpose facilities very quickly to provide personal protective equipment, which is something that has been very beneficial. But many groups have gone to what Alan indicated, which is kind of either skeleton crews or cut back. Most of them have worked really hard to have work from home and virtual options. Those obviously, and Alan indicated this as well, manufacturing is a kind of a must be present to win type of an industry. It's hard to virtually manufacture arrows and bows and outdoor products. So those crews, in a lot of cases across the state, have been pulled together in small groups that then work in teams and have been much easier to track the virus, control that, see where individuals whom they've been in contact with, that type of thing. We have had breakouts of the virus within our operations across the state, and have heard of numerous ones. our companies have gone to great extent to try and address that for the safety and well-being of their employees. And I think they're doing a good job. There's certainly work to be done as we're going from orange to yellow, but companies have tried to remain open and try to keep the economy driving during kind of this uncertain time. Maybe I just elaborate just for a minute, Mike, on kind of what we see most for our companies doing, and I know Easton's doing this because I've had discussion with some of their folks that a lot of folks are doing thermal testing of employees when they get to the facility boundary, and then depending on what their own personal corporate discussion is or strategy is, depending on what the elevation of the temperature is, then they would take that individual to a separate area and then do further testing. And if they indicated that they need to be tested further, they make an appointment for them to go get COVID-19 tested. But again, those types of things with thermal scans, sanitization, sterilization of work areas, those are things that companies are doing right now. When it's appropriate, I think there's certainly some opportunity for, I'm sure Alan as well as myself, to talk about what are going to be the challenges for companies right now as they're coming back and ramping up, and what those challenges may end up being for the next 6 months if the virus kind of lingers around.
That's very helpful, Todd. And it's a great lead in to a question I need to ask Christina. And that is, so Todd talked a little bit and Alan talked about PPE, masks, things like that, also testing, also workplace signage, maybe one-way areas and social distancing. So Christina, can you give us a little information about kind of what manufacturing companies should be thinking about in regards to PPE, testing, and management of the workplace?
Yeah, so whether you've had your operations going this entire time or you're coming back, you need to make sure you at some point have really walked the entire workplace from beginning to end. So, kind of do this physically. Figure out how your employees come into the workplace, where they park, how they enter the building, how they go to their workstation, how the different jobs operate during the day, and look for all the risky areas. At what juncture are people potentially congregating, and you need to have rules about that. At what point do they need to put masks on and gloves? Are there places where you can make sure that social distancing can happen and places where you cannot? And if you cannot, then there are additional things you have to do, like, definitely having protective gear, potentially having plexiglass dividers, lots you need to really think about. And you can't do that unless you've really thought about your workplace from start to finish. And after you've done that, you need to look at, there's a number of places to look for guidance about how to implement changes. You can look at CDC guidelines, OSHA guidelines. The state of Utah has guidelines. Your industry probably has some specific guidelines. So, depending on what area you're in, if you belong to any industry organizations, contact them and see if they have something specific that you can look at to include in your plan. But, you really have to understand your individual workplace and where the pinch points are.
Well, that's very helpful. In regard to PPE, gloves and masks, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so really, the Utah guidance is a little unclear about whether it's mandating masks or simply recommending them, but I think the safest thing for an employer to do is always have people wear a face covering in the workplace. And the other thing you have to think about is if you have high-risk individuals, which is, I think, one of the most important things to think about going forward, is high-risk individuals should probably have N95 respirator masks if you can get a hold of them. Now, I realize those are very difficult to get a hold of, but that is the recommendation from the state of Utah, if you can, for high-risk individuals to have N95 masks.
Christina, you did a great job hitting the ball back, and now it's across the net and squarely in front of Alan Flake. And Alan, I will ask you, if you at Easton, are you guys having any difficulty obtaining PPE or any, any of the things that you intend to use to try to keep your workplace safe?
Yeah, I mentioned that we, back in early March, started to think about some of these things. As many of you know, there were industries and companies that pretty quickly decided that they wanted to start doing temperature screenings. That is difficult sometimes when you can't get those thermal devices that are able to take those screenings. And there's also a question about the accuracy of those devices. But we've had those on order now for months, now maybe I should say weeks, and still don't have those. But we've done what we could with what we have. The mask, as Christina points out, those N95 masks and better are recommended if you can for your high-risk employees. They are difficult to get. Most people, if you try to order them, will say that they're reserved for healthcare workers and others. But if you can get them, that's great. What we've done is we placed an order some time ago to get cloth masks that are reusable. And when we give those masks to employees, it also comes with instructions. I think it's really important that people understand the instructions for using these masks, because none of us are used to wearing a mask. And you can undo all the good you did with a few critical mistakes when you're wearing those masks. But the regulations also talk about making masks available. Some of the language that you read is a bit confusing, and what that really means to be made available. So we're trying to give every employee a cloth mask, but also making available disposable masks for those that may not have their mask for some reason. But yeah, wearing masks is difficult, and as we're finding out now, there are certain activities and things that don't lend themselves to wearing a mask, and so we have to be careful. I think always with employee safety first and foremost in our thoughts and how we're coming up with these policies, but also recognizing that sometimes that's difficult or impossible to do. So in answer to your question, we have had some difficulty in securing those things, and even though we started the process quite early, we have had those struggles.
So Todd, I'll bet when you became the president and CEO of the Utah Manufacturers Association, you never envisioned yourself as a PPE procurement specialist. But yes, very appropriate.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
This is my Bane mask. It's a Batman. Someone says it looks like Bane. I don't know what that is, but it's a made in Utah. So.
And I like the delicate arch on it. So tell us a little bit about the terrific struggle that some entities have had in obtaining PPE. And do you have any thoughts about that? Any suggestions about that?
Yeah, no, the state contacted us. I guess it's been about 3 weeks / 3 years ago. Feels like about 3 years ago. And wanted to do this program, A Mask for Every Utahn, and said, could you help us manage that? And we said, absolutely. We think we have a wide variety of companies out there that could certainly transition and repurpose and retool to make masks. And so that's what we did. We'll deliver somewhere in excess of 1.5 million masks to the state within the next 20 days. They're coming in at a rate of about 25 to 30,000 a day right now from about 20 different companies. And amazingly, these are companies that pre-epidemic were making mattresses and Letterman's jackets and socks and airbags and seatbelt tensioners, and pretty much anybody with a cut and sew operation is able to do that. So we're filling the state contract, but one of the things we're also doing is have a full-time team member of ours that's working with companies like Easton and others to, if they have a need for cloth masks or hand sanitizer or gowns or anything else, we have compiled a very robust spreadsheet with information about who's producing those. And the reason it's been helpful for us is we know the supply chain and we know how many XYZ company is manufacturing on a daily basis, what their excess capacity is. So if someone's looking for 20,000, we can connect you with a company that can get you that 20,000 very quickly, or can get you 5,000 very quickly, versus just randomly calling a company you've heard that's making masks and then kind of being stuck in that, shall I say, the Amazon fulfillment of I've ordered it and it's 4 weeks out, but it may not get here in time to really do anything. So certainly cloth masks. So when we went through the process, without belaboring the point, Mike, we went through and took the designs of about 30 companies, broke them down, had our manufacturing engineers on our staff redesign a mask. And so all the masks that are being produced for the state fit a standard, a certain thickness. We've conducted some, I won't say they're UL listed lab tests, but they are tests that prevent and make sure that a certain amount of air and no moisture passes through the mask. They're not an N95 mask, but they certainly will meet the CDC guidelines, and they do that. Amazingly, we have a company in Utah that actually made this mask that has just finished a test with one of the medical device companies in the state that has produced a reusable filter mask that is washable, reusable, that is testing at N90, which is actually pretty cool. And so Alan is right. Most of those N95s, Autoliv is producing gowns, as is Coleman Knitting and others that are, most of those are all immediately going to healthcare folks, and they need to. We got a call from IHC the other day that one of the hospitals said we have 8 gowns left, and that's it. So we're trying to do what we can on the PPE side. Like you said, I didn't imagine that coming out of the legislative session that I would, our team would be making, close to 2 million masks, but we're pleased to do our part. And I think it speaks to the resiliency and the innovation and the flexibility of the manufacturing community in the state to be able to do that. And I didn't even mention companies like L3 that have shifted over to making respirators, and other companies that have just simply said, look, we have this piece of equipment, this much throughput, these processes, send us a spec, we can build that. And a lot of our companies have been able to respond that way. And so what an amazing thing to see creators and makers in the state just strengthening the economy and helping do that. We're just happy to be a part of it.
That's fantastic. So now let's say a company acquires a thermo scanner and they start scanning their employees, Christina. What advice do you have for them about whether they can do that? And if they do it and they log in that some employees have fevers, what do they do about that?
Right. So pre-pandemic, it would be very rare that an employer would ever be allowed to take an employee's temperature. The Americans with Disabilities Act really limits something like that. But in this situation, the EEOC has said that employers absolutely can take temperatures. They can ask about symptoms, and in fact, the state is recommending that employers, at the very least, ask about symptoms. Taking temperatures is even better because you're getting an additional symptom. But it's really important to have a written policy about what you're going to do, and what's going to happen if an employee has a certain symptom or has a certain temperature, so that it can be consistently applied. You can't do it inconsistently. You can't have different standards for different people. So some, I can't hear you, Mike, but some employees or some employers are sticking with the CDC guideline of 100.4. If you have a temperature of 100.4 or higher, that's considered a fever and you should go home. You could do it a little bit lower. I've seen some employers go as low as 100. So between 100 and 100.4 is good in terms of a threshold. And then you really have to, have a policy that if someone hits that, they need to go figure out what's going on. It might be that they have COVID. It might be that they have, some other issue going on, but they need to be cleared one way or the other. And then you asked about, if you're logging that information, what are the implications of that? That is information that has to be kept strictly confidential, just like any medical information that an employer collects. It has to be kept in a file separate from any other employment files, and it should only be shared with a very small team of people. Need to know top management. It should not be shared widely.
Thank you so much. So this is now going to kind of turn into a little bit of a speed round. You don't have to have particularly short answers to these. But Alan and Todd, I want to ask you both, kind of as we enter this phase where we're in orange, we're supposed to be moving toward yellow, but who knows if there's some backsliding. Maybe we'll go back to red or stay at orange for quite some time. What keeps you up at night? In your position, Alan, as a vice president and general counsel, what's on your mind? What keeps you up at night?
Oh boy, I'm always asked that question. I think there are quite a few things right now that are keeping me up. First and foremost is an outbreak of COVID cases in our facilities. And I think it should be that way. We need to continue to be vigilant in trying to protect our workers, and especially if those things are preventable. That's what drives us to make sure that we're really on top of the guidance and everything that we're trying to do. At Easton, we've had a couple of cases. Unfortunately, we've had policies in place, and as you were started to explain with temperatures and other things, we've known what to do when. And because of that, it made that transition, or that whole exercise much easier for all of us, because we kind of knew what to do before we had to try to think about it too much. Another thing I guess I'm a little worried about, and you're hearing about it in the news, is a potential mutation or second wave of COVID. Utah's been fortunate that we've kept our death rate and our hospitalization rate relatively low, but that concerns me that this could come back around on us. So we need to learn well the lessons that we're all trying to talk about here today. I think I'm concerned also about some of our high-risk employees, as Christina mentioned. We try to do some extra things to protect them. The state has published some guidance on what to do for high-risk employees and a hierarchy of controls that we can use in those cases. Frankly, I think that hierarchy is applicable to all of our employees. It talks about how you isolate people from the risk and how you change their work. And then lastly is the personal protective equipment. But still, all of those are things that we can do. So I worry about how we're making sure that happens. And the longer this goes, I think I'm getting worn down by it, frankly. And I'm worried a little bit about the morale of our folks, because we're all wondering what the new normal is going to look like. And in the manufacturing space, that's there's a lot that can change. And I do think that a lot of the lessons that we're learning here will be ones that stick with us, and that will change some of the procedures that we have going forward for the foreseeable future. I guess I would worry about a slower than anticipated economic recovery. We're all making products that we hope will land in a market that isn't going to go away anytime soon. So that's important. I think though, Mike, the thing that really I worry about probably the most is understanding and correctly following some of the vague guidance that we're getting. Christina, you mentioned we're all trying to listen to the CDC, to OSHA, to the state of Utah, to all of these different local counties, to industry, to the WHO. I mean, there's all these voices that we're trying to pay attention to. And I think most all of us, I hope, are in good faith trying to comply with the guidance. But understanding what the guidance is can sometimes be difficult. And I understand too that everybody's doing the best they can. These health departments and others this is a novel virus, and they're doing the best they can to understand it and to get information out to us. But some of these regulations use very broad language. What does it mean to monitor? What does it mean to screen? What does it mean to make available? What does it mean to, and it goes on and on. How do we drill down and really understand if we're trying in good faith to comply with that? I know maybe some on this webcast are dealing with PPP loans, trying to deal with SBA guidance. That's one that just recently something I've thought about, because in that scenario, companies are supposed to certify that because of the uncertainty caused by COVID, the loan was necessary. Well, I think that's the whole point, is that uncertainty creates the necessity. But I mean, all of that is just difficult sometimes to follow and make sure that we're doing everything we can to correctly interpret all that. So I thank Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer and others that are trying to help us to kind of navigate through all of that, because it is difficult, even for me as a lawyer, when you're trying to advise companies and you don't have case law and you don't have statutory law, and you're trying to do the best you can with what you've got. But at the end of the day, I think we have to remember that we've got to act in good faith. I think our attempt has been to lead with humility, and if we can do that, I think we're all trying to do the very best we can. And I guess, Mike, the last thing I would say as far as what's got me a little bit worried is the possibility of future lawsuits. That's, as I understand it, and you guys will correct me if I'm wrong, but the governor recently signed some legislation that might help employers who might be worried about potential liability in this COVID world. But as I mentioned, I think Easton, our products are going out all over the country, all over the world, and so we've got a pretty big footprint. So I do worry a little bit about that. I'm hopeful, however, that the things that we're doing and the guidance that we're trying to follow, all of that will mitigate the potential for litigation. But again, if you do, as I think you're doing, and that's always put employee safety first, above profits, above everything else, we will get through this. We'll be better and stronger companies for it. If this is my last chance to say anything, I do want to thank Utah Manufacturer Association. Our risk manager, Karen Griffin, serves on their board. Appreciate all of their good work and efforts in masks and everything else that they're doing right now as an industry to help us. But and again, to Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer for your great guidance on these issues. Thank you.
Alan, thank you so much for all of that. And your reference to Senate Bill 3007, the Senator Cullimore bill, is something near and dear to Christina's heart. And so we're going to give her a shot at that in a minute. But first, I'm going to ask Todd Bingham that same question. Mr. Bingham, as the guider and shepherd of manufacturers all throughout the state of Utah, what keeps you up at night?
First, let me just say I'm not comfortable with that title, Mike, but I'll work on something else. We can chat later. Yeah, I think Alan did a fabulous job in talking about a lot of those things. I'm glad. I'd love to hear Christina's thoughts on SB 3007 and signed Monday by the governor. My colleagues around the country, as we've visited every week with the other states, they're jealous of that piece of legislation, and many of their states are not open. They're looking at some challenges. I think there's a few things, Mike, right now. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, if I could. Those are three things that I think every company is looking at right now. And Alan did a great job of what's normal going to look like in 2 weeks, what's normal going to look like in 6 weeks or a year. what keeps me up at night, probably for a lot of our smaller manufacturers, which is the bulk of the companies in the state, is how will they return to work now? What changes do they have to make in their operations to be able to assure that they can deal with the sanitization efforts? Many of these companies have operated for many years with a flow and a system in their manufacturing operations that haven't had to deal with 6 feet of space. And many of those companies are going to need a lot of help in looking at the flow and the production, how to get production up and waste down, amidst what Alan indicated, which is a very challenging morale situation right now, where it's not only are employees nervous and concerned, but companies are concerned for those employees, for their health and for their safety, and how they provide the best possible workplace for them, but also understanding, what do we got to do in the next 3 months to see us come out of this and grow and maintain. I've got a significant number of companies. We had our board meeting, as Alan alluded to, Karen's on that, about 2 weeks ago. Weeks now feel like months, don't they? And it was 2 weeks ago, but we had about 40 of our board companies on, and it was fascinating and amazing amidst a pandemic, a horrible scenario, to listen to the discussion of the board members sharing thoughts and ideas and what they're doing to get through this. And most of it was not business related. It was morale related in how we take care of our employees and how we help them emotionally get through this type of thing. Maybe just a couple other thoughts, Mike. One is a lot of our smaller companies in the state are heavily involved in the oil and gas industry, as well as in the aerospace industry. 2 areas that have been hammered over the last little bit. And those companies, if you're a CNC milling machine, or you're a composites company, or a plastic injection or a molding company, and you're doing a lot of work for those areas, or even for a medical device company who were just starting to get back to the norm of elective surgeries happening, things like that. It's not as if one of those segments for those manufacturers has dropped off. In many cases, all 3 of them just went flat. And certainly Easton can refer to that. There are folks that have done okay during this. Who would have thought that being a toilet paper manufacturer might have been the preferred business during something like this? But I've spoken multiple times with Procter & Gamble, and they just can't make it fast enough. So, but again, those are the things I think companies are going to need some help from a lean perspective, from a continuous improvement perspective, in particular small companies, that once they get a handle on the things that Christine is talking about, and there's certainly some fear there. And when we get a chance, I'd love to ask you a question on the webinar, because I was asked it today. But as those companies are saying, okay, once we get that under control, how do we help these companies that normally work, or these individuals that work in these close groups? What do we do within our scenario of our operation? Do we revamp the whole floor? Do we reposition everything? Automation becomes important, and we're going to need to look at even more potential automation as we move forward. But the fear with automation, from, again, a morale standpoint and employee standpoint, is the fear is that you're always going to automate and remove employees from the workforce, which doesn't generally happen. You become more productive and you hire more employees, but the general feeling is that automation removes employees. And so all these things are just exacerbated right now, I think, during the thoughts of not knowing what we're doing. And then maybe just lastly is capital. Capital is extremely fickle. And there's 3 things, those 3 things that capital doesn't deal well with: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And if you're small companies that are looking at capital investment sometime in the near future, that certainly is unclear right now.
Well, that was very helpful. Those are great answers. And so, Christina, back to you. And we've just heard both Alan and Todd tell us all the things that keep them up at night. And so maybe your answer regarding Senate Bill 3007 will allow them to get a little bit more sleep tonight. And so could you tell us a little bit about Senate Bill 3007 and your take on it?
Do you want to sleep better or do you want the truth? I'll give you the truth.
Maybe the truth.
Okay. So, I mean, we all know what the scenario is. The scenario is there's an outbreak at your manufacturing facility. Employees get COVID. Maybe a couple of people pass away. If this has happened to companies around the country. They take it home. They get family members sick. They're really ill or they pass away. And then you have 8 wrongful death lawsuits against your company. Because as far as we can tell, workers' comp probably is not going to kick in, which also means there's not immunity that you usually get with workers' comp, which means someone could potentially bring a lawsuit. So Utah has passed this statute that gives immunity to employers if they're doing the right things. But there's a few things you need to know about that. First of all, we don't know if that statute is going to stand once there are constitutional attacks on it. People are going to bring attacks saying that it violates the open courts provision. It may or may not stick. Even if it does stick, it has a couple of exceptions. You're not immune if you intentionally expose your workforce to this or you recklessly do so. So someone can still bring a lawsuit and say you were reckless, which really comes back to you have to follow all these guidelines. If you're, the best you can do is, try to understand the CDC guidelines, try to understand the OSHA guidelines, try to understand the Utah guidelines, local health orders, and do the best you can at your workforce to keep people safe. That's the best you could do to try to, make yourself immune from a lawsuit. That statute is not going to provide you some absolute protection.
That's very helpful. And it was interesting kind of how quickly that statute got through the books. It passed by a 2/3 majority. It took the governor a few days to sign it, but everybody said that he would sign it, and ultimately he did sign it. And so now it's law. So we have just a few minutes left, couple of minutes left. So perhaps I could get Alan and Todd to kind of finish this up by telling us if there are any unique lessons that they have learned through this process, either regarding safety protocols or business models or the economy in general. And I know that's very general and hard to do in a minute, but if we could give that a try. And Todd, I'll start with you.
From an association standpoint, I would say that we've actually learned a lot about our organization and things that we can be doing more efficiently. As I indicated, we have a center for business and continuous improvement within our organization and have 2 full-time lean Six Sigma gurus that work for us. And one of the things we're going to be likely doing a lot more of is this very thing, is virtual trainings, where I think the one thing that may have come out of this for us all is that we realize we're extremely busy and time is money. And the ability specifically in manufacturing operations to get away from a facility to attend some type of a training can be very difficult. And the virtual opportunities are something that we've actually had really good success with. And as I indicated, our board meeting, the first virtual board meeting we've ever done, may have been one of the most beneficial we've ever done. Now, maybe that's because you have 40A type personalities, C-suite folks that are all muted, and they can't very well respond. But it was very good to get those folks and have a great attendance because the time commitment is lessened. And so And then just lastly, Mike, I think Utah is, as we always hear, is very unique. We are very resilient. We have had one of the best economies in the country for the last number of years, the most diverse economy, and we will bounce back. We will be very resilient in this, and Utah is very innovative and very adaptable. And I would echo what our leaders have said, our elected leaders, that I think industry will step up and we'll see us bounce back out of that, and we'll see what we're truly made of.
That's great. Very optimistic. Appreciate that very much. Alan, same question. Any unique lessons that you've learned either from a safety standpoint, business model, or the economy in general?
Well, I think Todd mentioned several of the things that I was thinking as well, but I think, and Christina started this whole webcast talking about documenting what you're doing. I think a lesson that we've learned is that these safety protocols really do need to be documented. So having your plan and updating that plan for what does the future look like and how are you going to get back to business and all of that is really important. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that in what we're seeing is that every employee really has a different risk tolerance profile. And what I mean by that is some employees and some of our managers even are very upset. They're anxious about all of this. And others, they don't seem as disturbed or worried at all. But our safety protocols, the things that we're trying to do as a company, they have to be appreciated by everyone across the spectrum. And to do that, I think we have to be able to convince everyone in the organization that those protocols are there because they were well considered and that they come because we sincerely care about their well-being and their safety. I think that's critical. We can't do that and just do kind of a check the box rule-keeping exercise. It has to be sincere. If they feel that we really are trying to help them, then anyone and everyone can get on board. Those protocols reduce productivity. That's a lesson learned. I mean, they really do. If we hoped that they wouldn't, we were wrong. They do, but that's okay. Because again, it goes back to people are more important than things, and our workers and our employees are key, are just key to everything we're doing. I think I mentioned earlier something about humility. A lesson that we've learned is, and it's consistent with our mantra all along, but we said when we started our task force that we wanted to lead with humility and transparency. And I think that has been absolutely critical because we have all these questions. So certainly employees have those questions and many more. And so it's important that nobody's hiding the ball here. We're all trying to do the very best we can and trying to make sure that we're in accordance with our policies, communicating as fast and as much as we can. That's a lesson too. You can't communicate enough. We've really, given these different anxiety levels and even their attention levels, you just can't communicate enough to your workforce. We try to repeat our messages. We put up signage. Some of it is clever, some of it is, whatever we can do so that we're being understood and we're being direct. And I think that's been helpful. Honestly, we've had a few employees who've quit because they didn't think there are not enough safety protocols possible to protect them to the level they wanted to be. But overall, and the overwhelming majority of our employees, thankfully, have said, thank you for preserving our jobs and thank you for keeping us safe. And that's really what it's all about. And hopefully we'll just continue to do that. Safety first, absolutely.
Well, Alan, thank you so much. That's a great note on which to end this webinar. Alan Flake, Todd Bingham, Christina Jepson, we thank you so very much for your time. And thanks to all who have attended today. These have become a bit of a regular feature during this pandemic and will continue to do so. We'll notify our clients and prospective clients, friends of the law firm, of future topics as they become relevant. Until then, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much.